Okay, welcome back. Our next lesson covers vSphere Storage Policy-Based Management Overview, the good old SPBM acronym defined here, right? What is storage policy-based management in vSphere? What we'll take a look at what that actually means and also recognize the categories of storage policy rules. That's really what storage policies are. It's a collection of rules that you would like to have your VM compliant with as it relates to storage. Is that where the VMs are actually placed, or is it how we deal with the I/O as it passes through the ESXi server? Those are the two basic types of policies that we can implement in vSphere. So, speaking of which, what we'll find here when we do cover storage policy-based management, right? This ensures that the VMs are going to use the storage that guarantees a specific level of capacity or performance or availability, redundancy, and so on. This has mostly to do with where you place the VMs, right? That's going to guarantee the capacity and the performance and availability, where you might have different tiers of storage, for instance. You might have a tier 1 tier, a tier 2, a tier 3, and you'd basically create policies to define what makes up a tier 1 type of storage, what makes a tier 2 of storage, and what makes a tier 3 of storage. What you end up having is a whole selection of capabilities in storage, but those capabilities can then be essentially cut back, or at least you can choose a selection of those capabilities that make up the rules for what tier 1 storage is. You have another selection of capabilities that make up what tier 2 means, and another set of capabilities that make up tier 3. So imagine you have, 100 capabilities in storage, just to say a number, and then you make a restriction. You say, okay, well, of those 100 capabilities, here are the 30 that make up what tier 1 is. So it's a restriction in total set of capabilities, and we create a policy that says, this policy has a rule that says we need these 30 capabilities, and then you essentially grant or select the capabilities that you want. And then depending on how we're actually using the ways in which we set up our policies, we'll actually either automatically choose the storage that is compatible with that policy, or you actually do it yourself manually. There's a couple different ways of doing it. What you'll note here is in looking at this storage policy graphic, there are these two main types of policies. I'm mostly referring to the policies that form the bottom of this picture. These are what we call placement policies. They determine where a VM will be placed. Is the VM to be placed on gold storage or tier 1 storage? Is the VM to be placed on tier 2 storage or maybe silver storage? Is the VM to be placed on tier 3 storage or maybe bronze storage? That's a placement policy. Now, placement policies also come in three varieties. Placement policies can apply to traditional storage. The placement policies can apply to vSAN, and they can apply to virtual volumes. You'll note that they're actually different colors because, well, there actually is a difference here. When it comes to traditional storage, that's VMFS and NFS. These are utilizing or not utilizing VASA, right? You don't have to use VASA if you're going to create a policy. VASA can be very helpful in selecting the storage with all the capabilities being advertised by the storage. But not everybody has VASA-enabled storage, and if you don't have VASA-enabled storage, well, then you're going to use tags instead. We'll talk about what tags are in a little bit, but basically, you can actually just apply a label to a collection of data stores. So you can apply the gold label, for instance, to a set of data stores, and they would be basically the gold storage. And then you can apply a silver label to a bunch of what you would configure probably your second tier of storage, and so on. So you can do that too, without having information advertised by the storage. Maybe by working with the storage team, the vSphere admins can determine what makes up your gold storage, what makes up your silver storage, and so on. Now, these traditional storage policies are one way. What do we mean by that? When we apply the policy to the VM, what vSphere will do will tell you whether or not the VM is actually compliant with their policy. So what vSphere won't do is it won't actually talk back to the storage and verify or actually enforce that the VM is actually in the policy-based storage that you've defined. So it's not an enforcement per se, right? I know it says storage policy-based management ensures the VMs use storage that are guaranteed a specified level of capacity, performance, availability, redundancy, and so on. But if it's traditional storage, it's ensuring by reporting, telling the vSphere admins is the VM in the right storage or are they not in the right storage? If they're not in the right storage based on what their policy defines, then it's up to the admins to actually place the VMs themselves. So it's kind of based on a one-way communications channel, right? The storage tells us about the capabilities, and then the enforcement is done by the admin team. That is different than a policy based on vSAN and virtual volumes. These are bidirectional. What that means is that we can learn what the capabilities are from the storage, but then also the policy is then enforced through this two-way communications channel over the over VAS's bidirectional communications channel to enforce the actual placement automatically. So if I have a set of rules that says my VM needs to have this vSAN capability, well, vSAN will actually enforce that for us. If I had the same thing for virtual volumes will enforce the policy for us. So they're both placement capabilities, right? The different varieties. You've got your traditional storage and you've got your vSAN and virtual volumes. There is a big difference though in that traditional policies are not enforced by the system where vSAN and virtual volumes are. And you'll see we're actually going to do some labs on both traditional storage and on vSAN, so you'll see the difference. Now, in the middle of all this, you can also add a policy that defines how we're going to treat the I/O, right? Provide an I/O filter, essentially, as the data is being passed through the ISX server. So when you apply policies to virtual machines, you can apply policy that applies just a placement policy. You can also apply policy that just applies a filter to the VM as it's passing through the ISX server, and you can apply a policy that actually does both. And you'll see how we can take advantage of this. So while you might have a policy that says, okay, this VM needs to be on gold storage, maybe it needs a filter that gives it high priority. Whereas if a VM is on, say, silver storage, that's a placement policy that says it needs to be on silver storage, maybe it does need to have such a high priority, that's a different filter. So you can apply the two different types of capabilities in the same policy assignment. And we'll see how this works. So like I was saying, the way in which we manage policies will actually kind of depend on whether or not we're using a bidirectional VASA implementation or not. If we're using a bidirectional implementation of VASA, which is basically anything using vSphere 6 and later, when you find the storage capabilities, right, you're going to build a policy. Like I was saying, you're going to build a policy based on a selection of the capabilities the storage is advertising. So if your array advertises it can do compression, the array can provide encryption, the array can provide snapshot offloading, the array can provide all these different capabilities, you can pick and choose which of those you want to apply to a certain policy. So you don't want all of those, but you want to have maybe compression at the storage level. Well, you create a policy that says that, and then the capabilities will be requested through the policy assigned to the virtual machine. And then since the array is advertising that it is capable of doing compression, well, then the capabilities will then be fulfilled by the fact that the VM is in that type of storage. So it's going to be enforced for us automatically. If it's a case of traditional storage, well, then what we can think of, it's not really bidirectional, but in this case, you might find, okay, I have a bunch of storage that fits a certain type of tier, right? I have a gold tier of storage. And so, well, we can just request to see if the VM is actually on that storage. And if it is, it's compliant with this policy. But if the VM is not on that storage, well, then it's non-compliant. So it's not quite bidirectional, but the model kind of rings true here. The reporting part of traditional storage will tell us whether or not we're compliant with our storage policy or not. So let's take a closer look at the storage policies in action, but we'll do that after a quick break. So we'll see you on the other side.